Greetings and salutations, fellow book readers. This is Mark, and the book I will review today is Dead Souls. Before we continue, this is personalized limited edition of Dead Souls with leather cover designed and made by me. At the end of the video, I will tell you a couple of ways of how you can get one for yourself, if you are interested. Now let's get back to the review. Dead Souls is an 1842 novel by Russian writer Nikolai Gogol, or in English just Nikolai Gogol. Gogol was an early pioneer and influence in the greatest period of the Russian literature, 19th century. He wrote in a style that could be considered magical realism, before it was coined as magical realism in the 20th century. I find interesting parallels and similarities between the lives of Gogol and Edgar Allan Poe. They were born the same year and died within a couple of years of each other, and their work carries quite a few similarities, without one influencing the other. Perhaps it was impacted by the resemblance between the places they lived. On paper, the two countries seem very different, but their early 19th century realities were not that distinct. For example, in the US, slavery was still legal, and in Russia, the serfdom basically made peasants property of the landowner, which was traded and sold, similar to slavery. And both systems were abolished in the 1860s. Gogol, like Poe, was the master of the short story, with such great examples as The Noose or The Overcoat. Dead Souls is the largest and the best known Gogol's novel. Gogol's original idea was to write a trilogy, a modern-day equivalent to Dante's Divine Comedy, where Dead Souls would be the first volume, comparable to Inferno, and maybe he would have finished it if he lived longer. What is Dead Souls about? It is a satirized version of the Russian middle class, which mostly was composed of smaller landowners. It shows corruption, irrationality, and general incompetence of the Russian Empire through the individual with his ambitions, greed, envy, immaturity, cunning, etc., etc., etc. The novel on the surface is somewhat of a comedy, but underneath it deals with the serious and somber reality. I think Gogol summed it up the best in this one sentence in the book. The longer and more carefully we look at a funny story, the sadder it becomes. A bit of the plot. The novel is divided into two books. In book one, we meet the main character of the novel, Pavel Ivanovich Chichikov, who is described as middle-aged, stout, and of short stature, but in spite of his unimpressive physicality, he possesses a certain level of charisma and is able to charm others, especially his potential victims. The story takes place in the first half of the 19th century, not too long after the Napoleon's unsuccessful invasion of Russia, and the event is somewhat still fresh in the general memory of the population. For example, Chichikov's coachman calls the misbehaving horse Bonaparte, and some people think that Chichikov himself might be Napoleon, escaped from St. Helena. Chichikov arrives in a small provincial town somewhere in Russia and successfully injects himself into the circle of the affluent locals. He starts to visit the estates of the landowners and tries to convince them to give or sell him for a small amount the list of their deceased peasants, what he calls dead souls. Many of the people are initially taken back and resist his request and want to know why he wants the dead souls and wonder if he's not trying to take advantage of them. Chichikov, thanks to his somewhat charming nature, becomes quite popular in the local higher society, but eventually rumors about his doings and somewhat mysterious past start to circulate, and he comes to the conclusion that he might have overstayed his welcome and decides to leave. The last part of the book one is Chichikov's biography, his childhood, schooling, and professional career, and also Gogol explains the purpose of the dead souls. In Book 2, Chichikov finds himself in a different part of Russia, where he's trying to continue his old scheme, and also he finds himself attracted to and interested in new opportunities with the final goal of enriching himself. But, as usual, some unexpected complications arise, and eventually it all catches up to him, and he has to deal with it. And that's the basic plot. What are my thoughts about Dead Souls? I enjoyed it, perhaps not so much for the prose, but the comical situations and the general portrait of the 19th century Russian countryside. Gogol called the writing form epic poem in prose, and it lies somewhere between the two. The shortcomings of the prose, which is beautiful, might be caused by the difficulties in translating it. I listened to the audiobook of the Russian version, and even with my limited Russian, the book sounds better in the original. The title might have double meaning, where Dead Souls might be also a metaphor for the Russian middle class, as if they were soulless, only occupied with material and tangible. And Dead Souls also sounds rather serious for the satirical and even comical plot. But Gogol, in spite of being critical of the habits of the Russian society, seemed to want to show the value of Russia, where even deceased are worth something, at the time when Russians were more impressed by France, Germany, or England than their own country. Gogol spent half of his adult life abroad in Western Europe, and that's where he wrote Dead Souls. He must have been somewhat homesick, and it shows in the novel through his descriptions of the countryside and the traditions. Russia, Russia, what is the incomprehensible, mysterious force that draws me to you? Why does your mournful song, carried along your whole length and breadth from sea to sea, each and re-echo incessantly in my ears? What is there in that song? What is it that calls and sobs and clutches at my heart? What are those sounds that caress me so poignantly, that go straight to my soul and twine about my heart? Russia, what do you want from me? What is that mysterious hidden bond between us? Gogol's aim at the beginning of the novel was to convince the reader that he is giving a general view of the 19th century Russian middle class. He gives a broad description of the small town, simply abbreviated as N, that could be any Russian provincial town. Further, Chichikov represents your average middle-class Russian, and Gogol makes sure he appears as common as possible and describes him as such. A man who, though not handsome, was not ill-favored, not over-fat and not over-thin. Also, though not over-elderly, he was not over-young. It could be said about Chichikov that he had more ambition than talent, as is the case with most people, and also was lazy. But his advantage was that he possessed a certain level of charisma and was able to charm some people. He reminded me of a used car salesman, the way he goes about his business, even though he is buying and not selling. I think the following quote sums up Chichikov's life philosophy pretty well. I saw that I do get nowhere on the straight path, and that to go crookedly was straighter. Chichikov is a public relator, and to his luck knows how to use his limited talents. He visits individuals who might be useful to his venture and captivates them by listening and playing to their egos. There is a bit of Chichikov's autobiography which lays a foundation to who he is and what he is after. Here's advice about life given to child Chichikov by his father. Mind now, Pavlusha, be diligent, don't fool or get about, and above all, please your teachers and superiors. If you please your superiors, then you will be popular and get ahead of everyone, even if you lag behind in knowledge and talent. Don't be too friendly with the other boys, they will teach you no good. But if you do make friends, cultivate those who are better off and might be useful. Don't invite or treat anyone, but conduct yourself in such a way as to be treated yourself. And above all, take care of and save your pennies. That is the most reliable of all things. A comrade or friend will cheat you and be the first to put all the blame on you when in a fix, but the pennies won't betray you in any difficulty. With money, you can do anything in the world. It sounds similar to Machiavelli's advice to his prince about power, and Chichikov's ambitious search for comfort embodies the phrase and justifies the means. Chichikov stands on his own as the protagonist, but perhaps more importantly, he is there to draw out the variety of fascinating personalities that made up the Russian middle class. The ones I found most captivating are Nozdroyov, who is the funniest character in the book. He is a drunk, a gambler, a big-mouthed liar, constantly exaggerating and very direct in letting people know how he feels about them, especially their negative qualities. He is also very distrusting and nosy and wants to hear the real reason for the purchase of the dead souls. Nozdroyov tells Chichikov that he loves him more than his own father, but knows that he is a liar and cheat, and if he was his commanding officer, would hang him on the first tree he could find. Nozdroyov can see through Chichikov because he is not very different from him, and that's why he calls him brat, which in Russian means brother. Manilov is trusting, shy, effeminate, and seems desperate for friendship. He inhabits his own utopian world, loves everybody, and always sees the glass as half full. He instantly likes Chichikov and daydreams about their great future friendship. Sobakievich, his name comes from the Russian word sabaka, which means dog, but physically he is described by Chichikov as a bear, tall and large and putting away huge amounts of food. Sobakievich is the type that distrusts and dislikes everybody, including Chichikov, and this makes him difficult to negotiate with. Kostanzoglo is an example of an organized and effective Russian landowner, but ironically the book implies that he is a foreigner, maybe from Caucasus, perhaps a Georgian or Armenian. He says to Chichikov, "If you want to get rich quick, you will never get rich, but if you work and don't care when you get rich, you will get rich quick." Isn't that an eternal truth, even more relevant today? Too many people trying to get rich quick without providing any real value in exchange. When I was younger, the business ideology was to under-promise and over-deliver, and today it seems to over-promise and under-deliver, and often not deliver at all. Chichikov is deeply impressed by Kostanzoglo's philosophy and is considering following his advice. He realizes it would be useless to talk about dead souls to somebody like Kostanzoglo, since he is the first man he met in Russia he respects. There are a few more characters, and they all give a decent cross-section of the Russian landowning class. Dead Souls portrays general life of the landowners. They were the base and the backbone of the Russian economy, probably more so than in the West, where the industrialization already started to slowly replace agriculture as the dominant economic activity. Back then all the value was in the land, and the most valuable resource were the serfs. Dead Souls perhaps doesn't criticize directly, but through the plot shows how backward Russia's economic system was compared to other European countries. The country was basically stuck in the Middle Ages and used serfdom as the base of their agricultural labor. Serfs were one step above slaves, which they replaced after the fall of the Roman Empire. The general difference between slavery and serfdom was that one was mostly based on race or religion, and the other on the social position. In theory, serfs could not be sold individually, but as a package with the land they inhabited. However, in practice, they were traded just like slaves, as it is described in the book when Korobachka mentions that she sold a couple of her serf girls. Also, Chichikov is able to buy individual dead souls as if they were alive, because it was an unwritten and unspoken rule and a habit. His argument to buy them, or preferably acquire them for free, is that the landowner has to pay taxes on every soul he owns, including the dead ones, until the next census, which probably was held every 30 or 40 years. So Chichikov is claiming that in actuality he is doing the landowners a favor by taking a tax liability off their hands. But in a typical fashion of country folk, not being very trusting with city slickers, they wonder why would he do that, and are somewhat hesitant, thinking he might be taking advantage of them and there might be money to be made. And that's the big mystery of the book. Why is Chichikov buying the dead souls? And it is revealed later in the novel. I think some readers might be able to somewhat figure it out on their own. Here's a quote from the book that might be helpful. So, went on Chichikov, if no obstacle stands in the way, we might as well proceed to the completion of the purchase. What? Of the purchase of the dead souls? Of the dead souls? Oh dear, no. Let us write them down as living ones, seeing that this is how they figure in the census returns. To sum it up, Dead Souls is a funny read that will probably make you laugh out loud at some interactions between Chichikov and the individuals he is trying to do business with or swindle, but the novel addresses some serious social and political problems that accumulated and eventually brought the end to the Russian Empire and its way of life. Some people avoid reading Dead Souls because of the claim that the novel is unfinished, since it is known that Gogol burned part of it, but maybe he burned the parts he didn't want in the book. For me personally, the novel comes to a natural finish after making its point, which was the corruption of the individual permitted by the corruption of the system created by the people running it. I think Dead Souls inspired, or maybe just similar, to a few later novels that deal with the same subject of somewhat parasitical existence of the Russian middle and upper class. It brings to mind Oblomov by Ivan Goncharov, which is portrait of one such individual. For the visual people who like to supplement their reading with some images, there is a pretty good Soviet miniseries from the 80s, and I think the characters from the book are interpreted just beautifully by the actors. Okay, let's talk about the physical book. The book I am holding is a paperback which I transform into a hardcover leather-bound edition. To make the cover I use grade A naturally tan hide I buy from Tenere in North Spain. It is the same leather Louis Vuitton uses to make his bag, so it is top quality. I do all the processing of the leather myself. First, I designed the cover, which what I did here. I took a painting of the 19th century Russian peasants, which were the literal dead souls of the novel. This is the bag with the blurb, and inside the front cover I printed a quote from the book. If you want to see a more detailed video where I explain how I transform paperback into hardcover, click on the link in the description. I will make maximum of 100 editions of each title. Each one will be numbered and initialed, and the numbers will go in chronological order from 2 up, since number 1 stays with me. The price will be around $100, so if you would like me to make one for you, you can click below on my email and send me a message. I do not guarantee I will do it, since it will depend on the time I have available, access to leather, and if I can get my hands on the copy of the book. Now, if you're not willing to spend the $100 but you still want the book, what you can do is click below on the PayPal link and donate $3 or more to my channel, and for every 100 donations I will make a lottery and draw one name, and the winner will receive the book. So if you are cheap but feel lucky, this might be the way to do it. Also, your donations give me the extra motivation to make the book reviews, and I appreciate them very much, so thank you in advance. One more thing, when you make your donation, remember to include the title of the book you would like to win. The book itself is beautiful. Visually, it has a very nice texture, it smells great, and the more you handle it, the more beautiful it will become. And it makes a great gift for yourself or somebody who appreciates books. So if you don't want, don't snooze, or you might lose. Well, that's it, so let's end it here, and until next time, keep your ear close to the ground and read a book. Adios.